Best in class, no doubt at all. Watch me rise, I'll never.
So, Geordie, thanks for joining us today for a conversation. We appreciate your time. We want to chat about, well, let's start with culture. It always feels in business, certainly in business, my background, it's this somewhat intangible thing often that you can't maybe put a number on it, which is often what people look for. And certainly in business, that's something, obviously, different cultures you'll experience through your career on the pitch, off the pitch. Describe it.
Yeah, look,
Put it in a box for us.
I think culture is an amazing thing. I think people really only talk about culture when there's a problem with it. I was very, very lucky to join Leicester at a time, 1997. We hadn't really been successful. We won a few trophies, but it was at a period where that year the game had gone professional the year before. Newcastle had sort of come out of the blocks firing and won the Premiership that year. And Leicester, we were in a team with, amazing players, guys like Leon, Martin Johnston, obviously the guy who just captained the British and Irish Lions. And we sat in meetings and we talked about how we could be the great Leicester team again, and so sort of really saw what that culture involved. And sort of Leicester was very simple back then. It was, really about being hardworking, humble and honest. I always remember the 3 H's and I guess being part of that side and sort of seeing how a culture develops and grows. We did things that companies would know about now. Sort of my framing, I think, for the first, obviously, 16 years, I was a player and I was involved in teams. And, people in the sporting world, take for granted what a great culture is. But looking back at it now, we got rid of players who were fantastic players, but didn't have the right attitude. They weren't hardworking and humble. They weren't honest with themselves or with their teammates. And as such, I saw a fantastic culture be built and then sustained. And then really, I was there long enough to see that kind of erode a little bit when we lost some leadership at the top, probably 2003 to 2005. It was the first time Leicester hadn't been in semi-finals. And it sort of faded a little bit. We had people come in who knew what sort of made Leicester strong in 05 and really built on that culture, really built on sort of things that made us good, made the behaviours that sort of we accepted were very, very high standards. And then that kind of changed. And for sort of every year from 05 to 2013, when I retired, we were in Premiership finals. Now, we didn't win them all, but we were always there and we were setting our clock by success. So in that regards, it was fantastic. And then I think, going after that, then sort of I was part of the coaching team from 2014 to 2000, sort of just about 2020, middle of the pandemic. So again, probably another, 7-8 years involved in there. And I just saw the whole thing happen again. I saw a culture really erode and degrade. And then we sort of managed to sort of fix that and sort of go back and strip it right back. And we went from being one of the most successful teams to in relegation battle and then sort of turning around to winning it sort of the season after I left. So it was a nice journey in the sporting world, really.
Can we talk about the erosion side of it? Because I guess, again, reflecting back, how hard are they to spot? Are they just outliers within the group? Is that just an outlier perhaps within leadership? And again, not saying they're there to disrupt, but they're obviously an outlier in regard to the culture and how you've seen it and then how it erodes in, and perhaps for listeners to see if they spot those challenges within their business or sporting space.
Oh, look, I think anyone in the business world will realise that, when you change things, change is uncomfortable. Yeah. And there's a huge amount done on changing how that looks. And I know that a lot of companies who I've spoken with, when you make a change, that causes a little bit of instability, and there's huge reasons for that. There's another probably hour we can talk about change, or probably a whole day we could talk about change. But I think at times when changes happen, and particularly in sport, that is really, really unsettling. And it's certainly my experience of that change process. Kind of, we weren't successful. We made changes at the top. People came in, we recruited badly. In that period of time. And I look back at it and I think that's probably why, sort of things eroded. We accepted behaviours, we were, when I was in charge there, I always kind of felt like I was very much firefighting, accepting behaviours that I knew weren't right, but, your sort of hands are tied in a certain regard in relation to contract lengths in rugby. You can't just remove players. You have to sort of try and pump for the best, but that sort of there are bad apples in the barrel and then sort of rotting things from the centre of it. So there was a huge amount that I learned in that period of time. And again, I think that's probably one of the nice things that when I speak to business owners and people in the business world now, at that period, you don't really have an appreciation of how similar things are. It wasn't really until sort of probably worked with some of the military guys, a kind of an appreciation of sort of the elite teams and how things really operate in that world, how it equates into the sporting world and then the business world. But I think from my point of view, I love going into business. I love working with companies and sort of giving the context of, I don't know your business. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but these are parallels that will be beneficial, and I think that's a something that I really enjoy.
What I love about obviously we played together for a long time. How difficult was it, or which was the hardest part of identifying when someone doesn't quite fit in? Is it easier to do that as a player? Because as players, we knew that as if someone's, no matter how good they are, if they don't fit into the culture, they stand out like a sore thumb. Versus when you're not on the field in the mix, and then you got your tracksuit on, or you're actually in an office and you identify the individual. How do you manage both scenarios?
I think the first people who will sort of notice the sort of disparity there are players. And it's probably the employees, the people who are on the ground with each other, and kind of get very much a feel for this person isn't working hard enough, isn't fitting in, and isn't sort of gelling. And there's very much, as a player, you get that feel. And I think probably the skill as a manager, as a coach, is probably to watch that, to listen to that. And then you're back to trust as well. And you've got to have some really great relationships with your senior leaders in the side, and kind of to be able to poke and prod and ask the right questions in relation to, who isn't working out. Just solely in that era, in sort of early noughties, I'm thinking of sort of the amazing players, like the international guys who went on to play for England, to play for their countries, who did amazing things, incredibly talented, who sort of, the face just didn't fit. And that's not always, I always said to players, when you're at a club or when you're in a company, if your face doesn't fit and, your beliefs or your sort of belief system doesn't align to the companies or the organizations, doesn't make you a bad player. It doesn't mean you're finished in any industry. It just means that that's probably not the right place for you.
So just on that one bit, that fit is a really important thing here when you talk about culture. So is there a high emphasis on fit? If you don't fit in, are we saying that if you're a maverick, because there are places that are mavericks and some are disruptive, if you like, if you don't fit, how does that impact culture firstly from a playing perspective?
Well, I think Maverick is a whole thing. I can remember years ago I did a thing in the States about managing Mavericks, a lecture, and I kind of think in American sports it's very much accepted. I think they really push this sort of the person who stands out, and it's all about them. I always talk about the trust equation, which I've sort of stolen from David Meister, and for me that trust is the base level. So Maverick is a really strange one. And again, we could spend a full day on Mavericks, because we had players who were Mavericks. I personally was sort of described on occasion as a Maverick because I did things a little bit differently. I think the one thing about all the top quality Mavericks who probably would be associated with the club when I was there is that they all at their core had winning and the best interest of the club at heart. No matter how brash, no matter how loud they were, no matter how sort of sometimes they did things that potentially weren't right, you knew that on a Saturday they would front up and they would be amazing because they were desperate to win. So they had that really, really competitive edge. So I think particularly in sales teams and bits and pieces like companies like that, the Maverick is really interesting because you want people to go out and be hugely successful and be individuals. But then, I don't think if you've got too many Mavericks in a team, I think that's where the problem falls down. So Alex Ferguson will talk about having Eric Cantona on his side, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the biggest Mavericks in the world, and treated differently to some of the other players, but he was the only one. And I think when you're managing one Maverick as a leader or a star player or whatever that is, that's acceptable. When you start having to manage 2, 3, 4, that eats too much of your time and sort of just takes away from the direction.
So if you look at, actually, first question about culture, you've obviously been a team, a club with culture, and you've got this, perhaps a great culture environment. And then have you had experience where you've gone then to international and you're down in a room with a different team, and naturally the culture will look different? Is that hard internally to manage, to go, well, like, say I've got a load of grafters here in my club and perhaps at international level, maybe it is different?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't necessarily, if grafters isn't the world, I think sort of at that level, everyone's going to work really, really hard. Without a shadow of a doubt, I was part of Irish teams. I was very lucky to be captain 2000, and I was my final cap was 2011. So I was kind of in that period of Irish rugby. From just before that, I would have been playing Irish A, late 90s. And that would be something that I would always talk about. Ireland hadn't won a Grand Slam in 62 years. we as a country, we play one of the only sports that plays as a country, a united country, but there are huge divides. And there are divides not just north and south. There's divides, Munster, Connacht, and Leinster. There's 4 provinces, and I think I'd been in that Irish side for knocking on 10 years. And it was probably one of the big things we had. We didn't talk about the silos that were within the team. And again, it's another thing that's very relative for companies and businesses when you talk about, the pride that people have in their departments, in their silos. For me, 2009 was the first time that was really addressed. And we really sat down. We had a really open and frank meeting where everything was laid on the table, and we discussed sort of how proud people were to play for different provinces. And I felt that it gave us the extra 3-4% that year to go and win the first Grand Slam in 62 years. So definitely there are sort of things that I've witnessed from the sporting world that would go into that. In regards to culture, I think that was kind of a small kick, but it was enough to get us across the line. British and Irish Lions 2005, probably some of the best players on paper that I've ever sort of been part of a group. And I think we were fantastic individuals, but we never came together as a team. And it was a very difficult place to go on tour, probably one of the greatest New Zealand sides that I've played against. But we well and truly got beaten. We lost all of the tests. The midweek side actually probably gelled a little bit better, and we won all of our midweek games. But I would say, as Lions tours go, and as Lions sort of tourists haven't spoken to a lot of them since, we really missed the opportunity to bond and sort of to create a team in a short period of time. So I think that was probably something that
that's that culture piece.
That's that culture piece.
Yeah. Sorry, I love that bit around. I never played for the Lions, but I've heard people talk about that Lions, and it comes back to your trust equation. If you waited. The Lions come together for a short period of time, and you've been kicking crap out of each other for the 4 years prior. If you wait to earn people's trust for the first 2 or 3 weeks of that 6-week tour or whatever, you've lost those weeks. So I suppose that is when, I think it was David Flatman talked about it, about when you go on that tour, you don't have to earn my trust, you've got it.
Yes,
straight away. And how does that work? Like, people have to earn trust, and people, when we play, it's like turn up, work hard, be honest, all those things. But on the Lions, you're given that trust already. You don't have time to earn people's trust. It's yours to lose.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, everything, every company, every team, it'll all come back to trust for me. That's where it begins with everything, every relationship. It's that. And I think there are probably, the Six Nations is strange because, you're used to going toe to toe on the line. And there's an element of, if you're playing for one team, I'm playing for Bath, and somebody else playing for Saracens, you kind of almost, you don't want to give your secrets away. You don't want to sort of even terminology. You don't want to, sort of say what you know, or you tell me what you know. Because there's an element of, you're going to go back toe to toe against each other sort of in 3-4 months' time. So it's difficult. I think you do need to build that trust. You do need to kind of get to know each other. I think we didn't do that well enough as a Lions touring party. We almost had taken England's model from 2003 from their World Cup. We dropped that into the Lions 2 years later in 2005. But we forget to consider that English team had been together for 5 years. They'd had huge, amazing experiences. They'd been in the trenches. They'd worked hard. They'd been to Linstead. They'd worked with the Marines. They'd worked with lots of different organisations. So that kind of that ingrained trust that helped England win the World Cup in 2003. I don't think it was there on the Lions, and I think we missed a trick, and that's me included. As in, I probably didn't know then what I know now, and I wish you don't know what you don't know. Wish you could turn back the clock and kind of help that, but I think that's what we got wrong on that tour.
Could we dig in a bit more into trust? Because obviously it's a pretty, I guess, can be a pretty broad word from, I do something behind your back and lose your trust. I assume it's more nuanced than that. So
again, there's a book, 2001, The Trusted Advisor by Meister and Green, I think it is, and it basically said trust equals credibility and reliability and intimacy over self-orientation. And you can actually do it as a sort of a mathematical equation if you want. And the credibility is kind of speaks for itself. The reliability, how often you're going to show up. The intimacy, when I talk to people about it, it's kind of a bit of a giggle. It's to say, it's not in the biblical sense. But I think that's probably, and it has been proven, that's probably the most important piece in it in relation to the intimacy is how well you know someone. So, they'll say, walking down the street, if you see someone across the road, do you trust them? Probably not. Mm-hmm. But if you sit down with them for 5 minutes, you get to know them, you get to know a little bit of the context of who they are, where they're coming from, what their background is, you're probably far more likely to loan them a fiver and think you're going to get it back. And the self-orientation piece below the line is kind of very much mixed up with the maverick piece in relation to self-orientation is, how selfish they are, how much their goals are above the team or above anyone else's. And, there's names I could talk to about it in that area. But again, when you know someone is kind of driven by the glory and sort of what's in it for them, then that kind of softens that number a little bit. So again, it's the age old thing in any sort of any industry. It's all about that. Any relationship, it's all about trust. But again, the intimacy piece, I think, is the most important to dial up and to really sort of drill down on how you build intimacy and how well you can get to know people.
Did you learn that? Like, did you learn that whilst you were playing? Is it reflective now again? Oh, that's what was happening at the time. Did you learn about it afterwards? When did you start to understand that to be so powerful?
More afterwards, really. And when I came out of the coaching world, I kind of started doing a little bit of consultancy, and I started to kind of get exposed to quite a few of these bits and pieces. And I think probably for me, one of the most natural things I suppose that I did was sometimes I think, oh yeah, well, I did that, or I do that, but I didn't know why I did it. And sometimes it's just natural in the way you learn things. Sort of experience coming through high performance organizations give you really great habits. And I did things that kind of, I suppose, afterwards I realized, oh God, that was actually quite good to do that.
The environment.
The big thing in leadership for me was, so I was the first non-English captain of Leicester in 125 years. So before me, there was Peter Whaler, there was Dean Richards, there was Martin Johnson, there was Neil Back, there was Martin Corey. They were all big, scary human beings who would run through brick walls for you. And I wasn't that guy. I was a fullback. I always considered myself a little bit of the glue. I was going around and making sure, checking in on people, being a little bit funny, lightening the mood when it needed to be. And that was me. So 2008, Martin Corey got injured. We went to the European Cup final, Premiership final, and I was captaining the team, but I wasn't the club captain. So it was, Cos's job to captain the club. I was there to, just captain the team, and I kind of did it in my own way. That summer they asked me to be captain, and I really was like, I can't do this. This is, people talk about imposter syndrome. Certainly me, as I can't be a leader. I can't lead Leicester. I'm Irish. Firstly, you don't have Irish captains in Leicester, and that was a pivotal moment for me. Really, I was very lucky. I was very lucky to be mentored by some really great people, and I started to look into leadership at that stage and kind of do a little bit of research, read some books, and kind of speak to some people and kind of just reach out in that world. And I think I felt comfortable reaching out as a player. I was okay to reach out to people in the industry and sort of military background. My father was military as well, but the thing that sort of drilled down on it was how to be authentic. And sort of, you just have to be, I can't be Martin Johnson, I can't be Peter Whaler, I can't be Dean Richards, but I had to be my own type of leadership. And sort of that helped me a huge amount. And at the time, I spoke to two different guys about kind of my captaincy side, a guy called Julian White and a guy called Dan Hipkiss.
They were in the team or extra?
So Dan had just left, and okay. Julian White was in the team. Dan had left that summer, I think, and Julian was still kind of in around. And I sort of said, what would you give me some feedback on me? What sort of things do I do, and what's good about me? I probably wasn't ready for what's bad about me at that stage.
Especially those two characters. I think one's at one end of the scale, and one's at the other end of the scale. For those that don't know,
and I kind of, again, you kind of know, okay, I'm in a position where I'm just in here. I'm not ready for tell me how I can be better. Tell me what's bad about me. So I was like, what's good about me? And they both said really, really different things. Oh, okay. So Julian said, I love the way you communicate with me. I love the way you just, you're on me. You give me really simple instructions. You're short, you're sharp, you're aggressive, you're in my face. You're like, Julian, get this done and get it done now. And that was Julian. And then Danny said, oh no, when I make a mistake, I love that you make me laugh, that you'll be running around behind in the field, make cracking jokes and laughing. And he said, it really makes me think I should be enjoying this. This is fun, which was a really penny drop moment or light bulb moment for me, or a wow moment, whatever you want to describe it as. In that I thought, wow, that's just, I'm in a game, but I'm doing two very, very different things. So I'm very much a chameleon in relation to realizing how people want to be treated. And that's something that I always sort of factor into what I do. People say, oh, I want to be treated the way I want to be treated. I say, no, treat people the way they want to be treated. And that's kind of almost what I did as a leader. And I tried to, really get into the psyche of people, understand people, and then treat them actually how they want to be doing, try to get the best out of them. So I think that's something that I'd always talk about.
So we'd stick a label on that and call it situational leadership.
Yeah.
So do you believe that that's something you're born with, or something that, and whether that's for yourself or other people that lead that way?
No, look, I think leadership is learned.
Okay.
I wasn't born a leader. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. I was incredibly shy. People sort of find that difficult now, that they think I'm some crazy extrovert when I'm actually probably somewhere on the other side, slower and more thoughtful. But when I was a youngster, probably until 17, 18, I wouldn't have spoken in a room. I was trying to keep that away. Rugby was fantastic for me because it exposed me to some fantastic things, traveling at a young age to New Zealand for a few months, where sort of I lived there for a few months, and really sort of that developed my rugby game. But again, I think I was pretty shy really when I came to Leicester as a sort of an 18, 19-year-old. I didn't really put my head above the parapet for the first couple of years. I kind of very much let rugby do the talking, and that was all driven by complete fear of failure, and that was probably a good thing. It's probably what I needed, because I wasn't big enough, I wasn't strong enough, so I needed to really just focus on my performance on the field in order to sort of break into this team.
The environment then, Geordie, just the environment back then was ruthless, right? So you talk about situational leadership now. That wasn't there then. That there wasn't. It was one way for everybody, I think. But in those early days when you came in over, there was definitely a fearful element when we were coming out of the amateur into the professional era, where you weren't really allowed to talk until you played 50 games. You had to earn your stripes at the very beginning, and then all of a sudden, a sort of a changing of the guard, a different era of people coming in. The game had to change. How do we compete? It may have been aligned to that meeting of how do we get Leicester to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I definitely that's largely true, but I do think that there was sort of, when you got into the first team as a young player, they would be hard on you, but probably a lot easier on you than if you were in the second or third team. There was a little bit of quarter given, and I think that was kind of almost the identity, was like, let's push them but not break them. Certainly I think that was the case for me, because although training was incredibly tough, and although we would say that was probably the toughest stomping ground that we've ever experienced, I was only punched a few times, and that I think was,
and I deserved it. It's okay.
I probably, in all honesty, I probably did deserve it. It's probably just very much cutting manners on me at the time. But no, I genuinely think I think other people had it really, really tough, and other people were made to work probably in that regards to show how much they wanted it probably more. But I probably proved it in other ways. By sort of the extras that I did, the running, sort of the speed, the qualities that I had, that I sort of really, that shone. But I think it was probably easier for me. It was a tough environment, and it was probably the toughest environment you'll ever be part of. But for me, I definitely think there was probably some quarter given.
One of the things Leon talks quite a bit about is accountability in that leadership piece. And we were having a conversation yesterday as well around the vulnerability part of that, and perhaps almost they're the same thing, just wrapped up a little differently depending on how they're presented. So I like the vulnerability piece. So since I'm talking, I'll ask that question around the importance of vulnerability in leadership and how you see that present.
Again, there's huge pieces on vulnerability-based trust. Again, it's kind of wrapped into that piece.
Because what fascinates me, certainly in a obviously quite an outsider to be quite obviously a brutal macho sport, that vulnerability piece, from the outside, like, how do these things mash together? Because it's the you've got to show that masculinity, but as a leader, you need to show that vulnerability without showing, I guess, too much that then the boys are on you. And
yeah, I think in the sporting world, I would say in the beginning that wasn't really a thing. I think vulnerability-based trust is probably more a generational thing. Very much in that period, it was an old school mentality of it wasn't a lot of vulnerability shown, and it wasn't really accepted or given, and then probably as a result, we weren't as good as we could have been. I think we could have been even better. One of our good friends was probably one of the first guys to start working with a sports psychologist in around kind of how to control his anger and how he performed on the field and his performance. And I can remember him, when he decided he was going to work with a sports psychologist in the early noughties, people thought he was mentally weak. Oh, what's wrong with him? He's a lunatic. And kind of these kind of comments were thrown out because we didn't appreciate that, the brain and psychology of, how to perform that would make us better. And we just thought, that was, weakness. We don't need this. We'll just be robots and we'll go at it. So I think that was probably where we were at the beginning. I love sports psychology. I love psychology now. And I think it's so powerful that, I couldn't understand, as probably my biggest regret in that space is that I didn't work with a sports psychologist sooner. I didn't really start working with a sports psychologist until the back end of my career. And then almost as a coach, I was very lucky that the psychologist used to come and stay with me once a week, and they I got more probably on a Monday or a Tuesday evening from working with a sports psychologist than I ever did during my career. But that's my biggest regret.
Is that environment, do you think? Because I think I remember in those early days, you're 100% accurate around. There's no sports psychs back then, and vulnerability was definitely deemed as a weakness. Accountability, absolutely, everyone was accountable. And we talked previously around the link between accountability and vulnerability. Is it the same thing? Well, back then, if I go back to that period, late 90s, early 90s, no one showed vulnerability. Everyone were accountable. But I do remember in the early days when we were talking about sports psychs, when someone would walk in and we had a psychologist come in once a week, and the captain was standing at the front of the room, no names mentioned, and would say, right, lads, the head doctor's in. Put your hand up if you want to go and see the head doctor. And everyone was like literally no hands going there. No one really knew what to be described as a head doctor straight away. No one's going to go and do that. But how the games moved on, where every individual has a sports psych. Why would you not? Like back then, the environment shaped our perception of what that was. And
and again, it's just the questions that you ask, and you go, so who wants? If you had said, who wants to work with a sports psychologist, you might have had 3 or 4 people going, okay, but you call someone a head doctor straight away, you're going, I don't need a head doctor. I'm fine. That's kind of where it was in relation to that. And I think the whole sort of accountability piece is hugely important. And I think that's across the board. That's not just in sport. And that's probably one of the things that businesses can improve on, the accountability, the frustrations that people see in the business world in relation to, somebody saying they're going to do something and not following up or changing it. I think that's incredibly frustrating. I think probably the piece that I would say there that's really helpful, and that's based in relation to vulnerability-based trust and accountability, is just the conversations, the challenging conversations. And one of the things that it probably did well as a player and as a coach was handle those conversations. But again, it was probably relative to the intimacy piece in knowing what people wanted. I think that as a leader is probably a great skill, is how to have challenging conversations, not be nice, be kind in relation to, what you're saying. And we did it very, very well. I think in the beginning, when we sort of were that, macho robot sort of organization, the conversations were very, very direct, very direct. And to me, it was probably a different communication style that didn't always sit well with me. And I wore a lot of things on very, very deep inside, I think, in that relation, until I kind of figured out, until the penny dropped again with relation to these people. They're not worried about how I feel. They're just worried about performance, and you want to win. And sort of, I'm deeply competitive. And then I was like, okay, so I can align to this. But
I think that goes towards what you said earlier on around how you communicated with Julian White.
Yes,
it was like very direct, bordering on aggressive, but that's what he wanted.
Yes.
But then versus now you have a different conversation with Danny Hipkiss, a little bit reverse, arm around him, light touch, where there was none of that before in the beginning. So you must have learned that, or waited for the right moment to bring that out in yourself.
Yeah, I think so. I think I probably wouldn't have known that if I had have never played at that level. I probably would have always communicated the way I find, well, which is probably that softer, slower. Julian White would have thought, this guy's just annoying me because he's just being too fluffy. But that would be my natural style of communication. So I learned the really tough communication style, what people need, these, sort of the deep red characters, the Julian White, who, just wanted short, sharp, fast, and just to be told them they don't care about anything other than what's in front of them in that 6 inches. So that's definitely something that I learned then. But I think learning, again, it could have been helped better to learn that, external, somebody with experience to come in and actually say that to you as a 19, 20-year-old, saying, when Martin Johnson screams in your face and just tells you not to do that, he's not doing it because he thinks anything, he doesn't like you, or, he doesn't care about you. He's doing that because he wants to win and because he wants you to be better. And I think that's a really powerful thing, which again circles back to trust, because when as a leader you're giving really critical feedback or constructive feedback, some people will call it, but you're having really tough conversations. If the individual receiving that feedback is in any way not trusting of you, they will think that it's criticism and they're, my job's on the line. Oh God, and it's not. What it should be is an absolute gift. This person cares about you enough to try and make you better, to try and make the company better, to try and make the organization better. But then it's how that sort of is fed through and that conversation takes place. Is important. Sorry, I was around in 3-4 circles there. It was quite confusing.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So when you're going into businesses, then I imagine like so many businesses are untapped in this area of looking at how they lead businesses, how then, so what reminded me of this was the hard conversation feedback, which is, I think is an art, I would observe, and that a lot of people struggle in that area. And therefore, the feedback they're giving is not constructive because it's just like, yeah, you're doing a great job, cheers. When the rally is, there's things to help. So when you're in businesses, how do you just help train those individuals to how to approach that feedback and get them to understand, obviously sit in the other person's shoes, how they're going to receive this, what colour are they, etc.
There's lots of different ways to do it. And again, I think it dials back to kind of how well you know the person, and how that relationship is. When you've known someone for a long time, I think you've built the trust due to the intimacy, the credibility, the reliability is there. You will take that on board. When Leon comes to me and says, this is not good, these are negative traits, I go, it's never nice to hear. I'm the person that it always kind of hits you for a bit, and kind of your first reaction, or my first reaction, is almost to put the shutters down and go, no, you're wrong, and fight back, and to come up with an excuse, not necessarily fight back or come back with anything critical, but the first thing is to think, shutters down, the person is wrong. But then I'm very good to, open the shutter back up and kind of think, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. I need a couple of hours on that. But the appreciation of that's who I am is probably fantastic. I think to give people the time in the business world to actually appreciate who they are, how they receive feedback, how they want it, and then to build that relationship in order to be able to sort of say the tough things, I think is hugely important. It helps with accountability, and I think that's kind of a fantastic thing for businesses.
One of the things that I think, when I go and talk to organisations around feedback, is that I crave feedback. And as an athlete, you get instant feedback. You make a mistake, the crowd tell you. Well, first of all, you know yourself. Your teammates will give you the look. The crowd will tell you. Social media will tell you. The newspaper will tell you. So you don't have an annual review. Yeah. You have an instant review all the time. And after a week, you're anxious around selection. And if you're not selected, you'll be told why. So your feedback is constant. And if you're not really seeking feedback, you're not really trying to get better. Now, when I left that sporting world, I'm interested to hear your view on it. When you left that sporting world and joined the real world, if you like, the annual reviews, or you have to wait a year to find out if you're doing a good job or not. Yeah. And I think that's something that organisations can learn. A simple thing to try and encourage feedback, and around that, it is a gift.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's why sort of ex-athletes make great employees for that reason, and I think people need to appreciate that as well. In that. And like you say, and it's not even just on a weekend, it's daily, it's bi-daily. You're on the training park, everything's being videoed. You drop a pass, people are looking at you going, why did you do that? The coach is in going, your hands were there. The feedback is very much live. And what's sort of seen as criticism is very much what you sort of learn to crave to make you better. So constantly on a daily basis, you're reaching out to coaches, how can I be better? What can I do? How can I sort of take my performance to the next level? So yeah, it's hugely frustrating when you come into the real world and you're just saying, how did I do? Or what was the feedback on that? And people going, no, it was really good. And you're going, no, I need more. I need more. And I'm fine if you want to. Yeah. It wasn't good. It was, this needs to be better. This needs to be better. No, it was really good. I go, no, I'm.
So there's skill, right? There's a skill in being able to have the confidence to give that time. We've talked in previous episodes around feedback on action or feedback in action. So the feedback on action, when afterwards you can look back and go, okay, this is what you could do better. Well, I suppose what sport does really well is feedback in action. When it's happening, how can we be better? What can I do? Yeah. And not to take it personally. It's like, I need you to be quick and tell me how I can improve. And then we can look at it afterwards and get feedback on it. I don't know how much of that is done outside of that dynamic environment.
I'll give you an example of it. So post-career, probably 2014, 15, I was doing some commentary. Now, I love rugby. I think it's probably the greatest sport in the world, and I consider myself a thinker in relation to rugby, and I dream about rugby. It's a beautiful sport. It's when I close my eyes, sometimes I see lines, I see figures, whatever. It's that kind of. In fact, I'm just obsessed by it. Now, I was asked to do some commentary. I rate myself up there with whoever there is in relation to sort of what I'm seeing on the field, but I was awful. And, kind of it was during the World Cup 15 and I didn't get feedback and people were going, it's your personality's just not coming out. It's not you. You're really boring. Like, a couple of my mates were like, oh my God, like, you should read children's books because your voice is so drab. You're literally putting us to sleep. And I think behind that, I've been given this book of facts of players and players' names and who they were and where they were from. And I was spending hours before these games learning these bits and pieces, trying to be a lead commentator in essence. and looking at these names, these bits and pieces, and I'm going, I was trying to memorize things, and I'd done 7 or 8 games, and I thought it was awful. Again, after every game, I'd go to the producer, I'd say, what's the feedback? No, you're great. I'm going, God, I know I'm not great because my friends are texting me, I'm getting abused here.
Sorry about that.
I know.
Sorry about that.
I'm awful. Yeah, no, but the feedback from my friends who know me, and I'm going, they're going, okay, so how can I get better? How can I? Ben Kay, brilliant. Ben Kay came to me, and Ben's obviously very experienced, fantastic in the space. He's just said, you're not there to do the lead comms. You're there to put some colour to what the pictures you're seeing. So just be yourself. And I would say there was definitely a performance increase on the back of that. So I was just like, what, book's gone. I'm going to talk on the game that I know, that I love. And some people would say I was still boring, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
and that's kind of really where, but it was a huge help. But Benny knows me well enough, and Benny's a mate of mine. Probably we're not real tight, but Benny's a good bloke. But he was like, mate, and just gave me really simple fixes, and I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. It links to the imposter syndrome, which we haven't talked about today. We probably won't, but it's around that staying in your area of expertise. So you know the game better than probably anyone I know about seeing the live and dynamic and why someone makes a decision, why they've done that. Like I might not choose to do that, but somebody else might. And so that's where you are. That's where your expertise. That's what you're known for, because that's how you played the game. Remembering people's names, date of birth, star signs, everything else. Leave those for the other people. I suppose you don't know that. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to go into a role like that, you're thinking, I need to be all things to everybody.
Yeah.
That's where you get these little voices, that negative self-talk, rather than saying, why am I here? I'm here because I've got 20, how many years worth of experience in this area. Let me show you what I've got.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, the gremlin. I call that like negative self-talk voice, and everybody's got it. And I call it the gremlin. He's got a name in my head, and he looks like a gremlin. But that gremlin, the night before I'd commentate, was saying to me, oh, you don't know that the Georgian number 13's name is actually, that really is pronounced in a slightly different way, and his cousin is the second row. And, you're going to be put on the spot tomorrow. You're going to be embarrassed here because somebody's going to go, oh, do you know what? And, the gremlin would tell you all these things, and you're listening to the gremlin the night before, so you're studying the book, and you're going, okay, well, I'm going to know that the Georgian second row is related to the Georgian centre, and their names are slightly pronounced differently, but it's just irrelevant information. But again, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. If we just, and again, not to be, or maybe be critical of the production side of things, are they not, like, then looking at that from a leadership perspective, are they not, we're bringing this individual to do this, is what they're not giving you instructions as leaders before you walk in the room going, this is your area of expertise, you can see a game dynamically way better than anyone else in this room, so you talk about what these shifts are going on here while we talk about the Georgian's name.
Yeah, I think from their point of view, they're bringing a scratch team together, and they're just trying to give you all of the information. Yeah. And they don't want anyone to get caught out by somebody that might be somebody's forte, that they need all of that, and they need to go through all of that, and that's going to be very much. And so I think it's just very much a one box fits all type thing, and they give them, everyone gets the same information, so nobody's in the dark. It would be, I guess, the complete opposite if you didn't have that information, and then somebody said to you, oh, what's that? So it's not their job. Their job is just to put it out. It's the individual's job to take responsibility for their sort of development. But the feedback piece where we kind of started this conversation is very much a case of people don't know you, so they don't want to tell you. Although I think, as I said, professional athletes are very much keen for, just tell me what I can do better.
And obviously when you go into businesses, that's the message you're encouraging.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's, know your audience, know the message that you're trying to sell. Like nobody, and why are you giving the message, I think is important. If you're giving a message to make yourself feel better as a leader, it's probably not necessary. And blame is it's a very easy thing to do. Oh, this is your fault, or that's your fault. And I think that's the accountability piece of actually, how as a leader can I control what I'm doing, what I'm saying, why am I saying things? But if you're saying things in order for the individual to get better and for the company organization to be in a better place, then that's probably the right thing. But it's just how you go with that message.
So we look at the steps through Leicester, from pitch to coaching the pitch to the boardroom. In each one of those steps up, so we'll go up to the coach. What one thing did you learn there you wish you knew here? And then one step up, what did you learn in the boardroom that you wish you knew as a coach?
So I was never actually on the board. I had to feed into the board. Yeah, sorry, senior. No, it's all right. I didn't know if you were confusing me with Mr. Boardman here. So yeah. I guess as an assistant coach, I probably would say my management up the chain should have been better. I think I did that pretty averagely. I kind of, again, you don't know what you don't know. So when you come out as a player, my sort of ambition at that time, I was sort of intending on going into sort of a very junior position with the academy. And sort of that was going to be a 2-day and I was going to be doing something else. And very quickly that sort of escalated and sped up and I sort of found myself with the first team. You don't know what you don't know, and I think I probably didn't manage up well enough, and I think that's pretty consistently across.
What does that mean, Joey? What does that mean? What do you do not manage?
Well, I just think I was quite happy to be in the position. I think I saw things happening with the management or the coaches at the time, and kind of even above that I kind of probably let slide, and I didn't flag, and I wasn't vociferous enough. I said things, but I wasn't powerful enough with how I saw things.
As a new coach,
yeah, definitely confidence. You don't know your role, you don't know sort of your position, you don't know your power. But there's certainly things like even in relation to recruitment and signings where I in meetings was like, this, we should not sign this person, but they were like, oh no, and it would go ahead and we would sign somebody. And they would end up being just a car crash for the team down the, sort of 6 months, 9 months later.
Do you get the old "I told you so" or not? Did you not?
No, not really. I never really had the "I told you so," but again, probably more vocal and sort of more steadfast in relation to this is a terrible idea for the team, and probably a little bit more. Again, it's probably confidence in the role because you don't know the role, you don't know where you're at, and sort of just again probably documenting some of that. Probably a bit of a mistake. And then kind of the head coaching role at Leicester was kind of a real disaster, really. And it was, again, sort of interspersed with COVID. So kind of, I don't know how normal a lot of that was. I took over on the back of Matt O'Connor being sacked after one game in the 18-19 season. And again, that was kind of very much a case of the club sort of had said to me, look, we know you're not the person to do the job. We want to bring someone in, but we want you to do it on an interim basis. We've got someone coming in a couple of months. Is this okay? So sort of my ambition at the time was just to steady the ship. This is kind of a September 19, sort of going into 18-19. But I didn't probably affect the changes that needed to be affected as a young coach. At sort of Christmas time, they sort of said, look, we can't really get anyone, but we want you to do it. We think you've done a good enough job. But again, then I was being kind of guided. I was the impression, and that sort of impression, I suppose, is sort of half of the battle, was that I was a young coach and that I wasn't up to it. So I had lots of people trying to help me. And that was just distracting. So we recruited coaches, we recruited players, kind of, there was people kind of dumping things on me that I didn't want. But again, probably wasn't in a position to go, actually, this isn't what I want. Coming back, if I'd come externally into Leicester at that time, I'd have gone, this is my ship, let me run it. If I'm going to get sacked, it'll be on my own head. Whereas now I always have the doubts of, if this person didn't come in this, but I thought that a huge amount of my time managing then was managing sort of across and around me as opposed to managing the team. And in saying that was a relegation battle, learned a lot about sort of coaching and players, and kind of we managed to stay up that season, although we had a very sort of broken squad, really. We had some unbelievable players, guys like Gareth Owen, who rarely gets mentioned in Leicester Tigers colours, but sort of played the deciding game with an injury, knowing that it probably was one of his last games of rugby, but still played. So we had an amazing season, and kind of the ambition then was to really redefine the culture. We started a bit of work back end of that season, redefining the culture, and sort of managed to bring through some really great players: Joe Hayes, Tommy Ruffell, Jack Van Portby, Ferry Stewart, some guys who are in the English team now. Sort of started to pick them out of school, really, to start playing in the team, and sort of to build on what made Leicester great was that honesty, hard work, and sort of a humility. Picked those guys, got into the following season. Felt that it was a World Cup year. So World Cup years for Leicester are always notoriously difficult because of the amount of players that go away on international duty. But that season started really well, kind of managed to turn the tide. World Cup year, games were tough. After post-World Cup, you come into Christmas and we started to get some wins, and I thought, this is us, we're going to take off. And then we got to January and got hit by COVID. And that was pretty much the end of me.
But I think I'm going to ask you in a minute anyway to give a book recommendation. You mentioned a few books now. A book, if you think back to your time when you took in, you said you were told at the beginning it was an interim position. So your mindset is around interim. So there's going to be two questions here, really. One is around, I've read a book called The First 90 Days. When you go into a leadership role, what do you do in the first 90 days sets the tone for how you're perceived, especially if you're in a new place. You weren't in a new place; people knew who you were, so you sort of gone up. So my first question is really knowing what you knew as a young coach coming in, saying, you know, I've got a voice, but it's not being listened to. I've got a voice not being listened to. When you're firefighting, when you're in that role, how aware are you of those other young coaches who are coming in who feel I've got a voice I'm not being listened to, or are you really, you haven't got time to think about them because, do you know what, I'm just an interim coach. I've just got to keep us where we are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that period was really difficult because what you forget as well is that we'd actually got rid of a coach. So the workload had sort of increased. So I'd kind of, again, I looked to bring coaches who I trusted in. And again, we didn't have any money to recruit externally, really. We were given a couple of externals who had already been recruited, coaching-wise. So I had to recruit from what I knew, and I was really lucky. I brought some great coaches through. I think Brett Deacon, who's at Leicester now, is kind of their skills, and he's doing the forwards. He's done the forwards the last couple of years. An unbelievable coach, did a great job at the time. But again, a really young coaching team. So the optics from the board's point of view were, well, these guys are really inexperienced, and they were trying to add experience by age, which probably wasn't really a great dynamic for us in relation to kind of the relationships across the coaching team. So that didn't work. So again, that was a management piece, and that was a lot of firefighting. I was always very conscious to listen to the coaches. So Boris Stankovic and Brett Deacon and Sir Anthony Allen, guys like that, I would have always kind of sought opinion. And I think that probably, again, ate a little bit too much time, because in a more high-performing environment, it would be, right, give me the feedback, and I wouldn't have felt so conscious about kind of hearing everyone's opinion on the consensus. We would have moved a little bit quicker in relation to some of the decisions, but we worked hard and we got through it, and the guys all sort of didn't grumble in that regard. So, yeah, I think that's probably one of the big things. I think the difficult thing of an interim position and being titled in is that the first 90 days, looking back on it, I probably just said, no, you know what, get someone else in to do it and launch when you're ready to launch. All of sort of the people who get put into a position from an internal role, internally promoted, I think that's the difficulty.
Which happens a lot. It happens a lot in sport, in business.
In business. Oh,
and who's going to turn it down? Like, you're working at an organisation which you care passionate about. You've got the opportunity to go up. You may not have the skills, but you'll figure it out. So you take the role and you may do things. I come across a lot of people who have been promoted that way, and then like, oh, if I had my time again, I would have done something a bit different.
And that's exactly it. And I think looking at when I went from playing to coaching, I almost did that. And actually Richard Cocker was brilliant because he encouraged me to it. You know, I went on my first day of coaching. I was supposed to be doing the academy at Cocker, but no, you're going to coach the first team. And he sent me out my own. And he didn't commit. And he sort of said, like, you have to snap it. They see you in this role as a player and a captain and a coach, and, you know, you're the guy who's going to be quite soft. He said, you have to snap it and you have to be something different. So de facto, he taught me there and then.
It's not even the first 90 days, it's the first 30 seconds.
Well, again, that's what I would say to anybody who gets internally promoted or in that role, is they have to see you in a different manner. So you've got to do something differently. So, and sometimes people will see you in that role. Perception is reality. Something you got to step away, take 2-3 days, come back in, and then go, right, okay, this is it. This is the difference. This is, you know, the way I'm going to lead, and to sell your vision or sell your dream. But it does have to be different.
So do you believe in that? What got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
So you do have to change.
I think you have to adapt. Not changes. Changes a whole day of you know, scary and curves and Kubler-Ross and everything in that regard. But it's a I do think you have to adapt. I think it's a different role. I think you need to have to sort of have a think about what it looks like for you. I look at leadership a lot, and again, it's kind of about vision and the sell of the vision. So I think it's communicating that really well.
Yeah, that vision's an important piece, and again, probably another day's conversation. But that, as an interim, that vision's quite hard to sell, isn't it? Because everyone knows in the room, I'm only here till Christmas, so we can tell us about where we want to be in 18 months in the World Cup, or I can make the World Cup, but the reality is any year, the next. Yeah.
And that was a difficult bit for me as well, because I knew there was pieces that weren't right. But again, I felt like it wasn't my ship to make redundancies, to sack people, to get rid of people. And then sort of after I got the role at Christmas, having operated with a coaching team and playing team, sort of I'm 3 months in, and now I'm having to spend time talking about recruitment, talking about, you know, actually these pieces aren't right, I've got to move. Yeah, unpicking. And at that stage, it's like, no. So the CEO at the time, who probably I didn't have a great relationship at the time, better relationship subsequently, you know, he was going, no, you can't do that. So most of the time I'd be saying, oh, this is what I want to do. And no, you can't. So I had 2-3 months of, you can't, you know, this is impossible, you can't do it, it's going to cost us too much money. and eventually it would happen anyway, but wasted 3 months.
Yeah. What was interesting looking through the bios, there's obviously loyalty, just in maybe the last piece here. That is that something? Are you there because still involved because you're loyal, or is it you've just found your home? What is that?
Oh, look, I felt there was a huge amount of loyalty. It was one of the things that kind of I really hung my hat on, and why I'd been at the club for so long. I felt like I had been loyal. I'd been given opportunities to leave for probably a little bit more money as a player. It's probably one of those things. And that was probably one of the things that cut me the most in relation to kind of, I'd always done handshake agreements and hadn't even signed contracts because I felt that I was very much part of the furniture. So when COVID hit and the club was in a really difficult place, I felt that it wasn't incredibly loyal the way anything was handled in my departure and things. So that really, really cut me up. And took me a little bit of time just to get over it, and kind of the realization that, kind of it's sport. It's professional business as well, and there probably isn't the room for the loyalty that kind of I would have hung my hat on that whole period of time. But I did a long period of time there. It was probably naturally at that stage where it was say a time to go. But yeah, kind of reframed my ideas on loyalty, I would say.
Great. So 2 quick things. Recommend a book, I guess, around leadership, and then also where can people find you, reach out to you, want to chat to you, network, meet, pick your brains?
Book is a great one.
Are you a big reader or audio book, or you made lots of references to quotes and academic models and theories? I'm assuming that you've done your research, but it may not be.
A little bit. Something that I kind of use a lot, and I would say for a leader, would be The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I think it's it's been a long time ago. I love The Trusted Advisor. There are things that I kind of refer back to in a strong way. Growth mindset, Carl Dweck. There are sort of 3, I would say, that would be the 1, 2, 3. I don't read enough at the minute. I really don't read enough, and I don't listen to audiobooks because I just actually doesn't resonate with me. Anything that I listen to kind of in the car makes me kind of, I get about a chapter in and go, so what was that? My mind takes me to different places, so I really need to do that hard focus and read, actually get down a hard copy. But I haven't been doing enough reading. Though the Lencioni model, I think it's very much kind of relative. It resonates well with me. It resonates well with kind of a lot of the people I know there's different models that people do, but I see kind of just that when I think about leadership, that's kind of the thing that I would look at. So I would say that's probably the book. And then the last really good book I read was Shantaram, which was it's a great book. If you've never,
What's it called?
Shantaram. They were going to make a movie about it. I think Brad Pitt was supposed to be. It's a great book. Oh,
all right.
You'd love it.
I would. I think I would.
Yeah, it's good. It's nice.
For reaching out to you?
Reaching out to me, LinkedIn directly is fantastic. I'm just on there under my name, which is a very unusual spelling, the start of George and Dan, Geordan Murphy. I'm on there. My wife tells me too much, but I don't promote myself enough because I'm kind of very much a organic and word of mouth type of person. But hopefully this might tickle someone's fancy. And other than that, through the BEST model, which obviously I've done the speaking course with BEST and really, really enjoyed it. And I've seen some people do it, and I think it puts you in a really good stead for sort of the position that we hope to be in.
Really appreciate your time, the insights. Probably could have chatted for 4 hours, I suspect.
Best in class, no doubt at all. Watch me rise.